I didn't want to butcher his name again.
Oh, I'm Wayne Elgin. Sorry. Hi guys, I'm Wayne Elgin. This is advanced debugging with Chrome DevTools, or DevTools and New. I don't decide well on titles. So some things about me. Oh, there it is. Slide out over. I work for, I do senior UX at Cantina, which is an agency that's based in Boston. We do native, mobile, and responsive web and back-end architecture stuff. Oh, you know what? Sorry, I'm just going to record real quick. Somebody asked me to record on the meetup. All right, there we go. So yes, I was saying I'm Wayne Elgin. I work at Cantina. We're a Boston-based agency. I work out of my home in Murfreesboro, and sometimes I come in for either working remotely out of one of the co-working spots in Nashville, or just to come to a meetup, get involved with the community here. So that's what I do. I've got 3 kids and a wife. There's 7 and 5 and 4. Not my wife, the kids. And so, yeah, they're coming along really nicely, and we have a lot of fun. I'm glad I get to work at home with them. So, let me just get back a slide. I want to talk about Chrome DevTools to you guys, specifically Chrome, because I want to cover something that has a lot of depth to it. Chrome DevTools, like, why does it matter for you? What's the value of investigating it? Why should you care about it? I wanted to kind of mention that obviously the top point of you get to go through and debug your code in the web. That's kind of the given DevTools reason. Accessing your DOM elements, inspecting properties, debugging and stepping through your JavaScript code and your CSS. All very valuable things to do when you're working in the web field. I also want to kind of throw out that you don't have to be accountable for this by the end of the session, but these are some just bonus things that you get when you learn Chrome DevTools. There's a built-in remote debugger for debugging Android, like the Chrome browser on Android, that you get when you learn Chrome DevTools. And you know, you can don't worry about taking notes necessarily unless something's really interesting to you. But I'll link to those slides here. You can link up to these things. You can debug your own Chrome instance on Android, and you immediately get that not only responsive in the responsive view of Chrome DevTools, but you get your mobile applications debugged too. It works with most of the Electron-based projects are Chromium-based, and Chromium and Electron share the same code base, is what I mean to say. So when you use something like Slack or Atom or other Electron-based things, they somewhere in there, you know, they are running the link engine, they're running the DevTools as well alongside of them. So if you're familiar with this, if you ever decide to build a native desktop application using Electron, you know how to debug that as well. So it's a very powerful tool set because you immediately get access to desktop tools if you decide to go that route with your application. There's also a thing called Node Inspector. So if you guys are writing node code on the server, if you're writing even like grunt scripts or gulp scripts to manage your front-end code and deployment systems, you can use the same exact Chrome DevTools in Node Inspector to debug that and step through it. And then some other things that have recently come up, Stetho from Facebook is a way to view your Android applications using Chrome DevTools as the lens. Pony Debugger is the same thing, but it's for iOS. It's kind of cool to see, instead of an HTML DOM tree, you see your XML like UI views like stacked out there. I don't really do native application. I just know that it's possible to be done. And I thought that's a very nice way to say, hey, if you learn one really robust tool set, you get access to this whole array of things. Skip that again. So let's move on to recommendations for how you should work. First of all, I want to mention that whenever I'm working with Chrome DevTools, primarily I'm working with Canary. This yellow icon here is the Canary icon. And is there a show of hands, like how many people use Canary as a daily driver for like development? Okay, so like there's about 5 people in here. So what I would recommend is everybody that is involved in, especially front-end web development, maybe co-opt alongside your Chrome stable or whatever channel that you're running for the mainline Chrome, also adopt Chrome Canary as a development tool. The reasons for this are, there's about 3 different good reasons, but one is that you have the ability to isolate your development toolkit from your personal browsing habits. That's not just like a cute benefit. That's really powerful because how many of us have random extensions that can mess with things that we don't even know, like millennials, async people, or what have you, where something will cause an unexpected replacement or unexpected behavior, and now you're trapped in this situation of like, is this a rendering bug from the browser? Is this a bug that extension, out of the 40 extensions that I have that is causing it? Or is this my code doing it? And so it gives you a nice, clean, sanitary environment to develop in and debug in. When I run my Chrome Canary, I don't sign into my Google account. You could, but I don't. I don't install any extensions that are not explicitly for the development that I'm doing. So like maybe you would install React Developer Tools, or maybe you would install an accessibility toolkit extension, and then nothing else. So it's kind of like how you maintain your Sublime Text or your Atom environment, just the way you like it. Treat your Canary install like that. Paul Irish actually recommends this as well, if you listen to somebody more important than me, to use the Chrome Canary install as your primary dev driver. If you want to install and follow along, you can do that. I don't want to saturate the bandwidth here, but there's nothing here that is workshoppy. If it's just for your convenience, if you would like to click along, you can do that. I'm going to be referencing Chrome Canary throughout most of this, though. The other benefit that you get is that, I look at this as a benefit, and I think a lot of people maybe would disagree, but I like that whenever new features come to the browser, they're going to come to me first. The way that Chrome Canary is set up is it is about 10 weeks ahead of the stable version of Chrome. It's basically like a nightly version. About 2 p.m., I think Pacific time, they push the new version of Chrome Canary up. And so if you remember Atom like a year ago, and like how you were getting daily updates, if anybody used Atom like a year ago, this is just like that. Like pretty much every day you'll get the little green hamburger icon up in the top right corner. And it will say, hey, you need to update. That might be annoying to you. You don't have to update it if you don't want, no big deal. But the more that you do that, then the more you're in the habit of, whenever there's unexpected changes in how the Chrome will interpret certain things, either on the JavaScript side, the CSS side, or the DOM side, you know about it first. You know about it 10 weeks ahead of your users. So that really allows you to stay ahead of any problems. The downside of that is that very occasionally you'll get things that, I guess I should say theoretically, that will be fixed. Oh, this is a regression, and then they fix it. I could say I've never had that happen that I've witnessed, other than an obvious thing like Chrome crashed on me. And then they fix it within the day. But if that's the case, honestly, just switch out to your mainline Chrome and use that for the time being. In general, though, it's a pretty safe thing to do. I have had it do regressions of how it renders things, not in Chrome, but in IE. Surprising. And Firefox has done it, where a legacy version of Firefox that the user was using was different than the stable version of Firefox, and so that caused a difference. But I haven't had Canary really messing up on a project. The other thing to consider is that if you think about most projects' timelines, any significant project, 10 weeks is not that long. So by the time you start working on a project, if you start it on Canary, you can vet it on stable when you're doing acceptance testing and QA. So real quickly, here's how I set up my Chrome Canary. You can see the screenshot I have here on the screen, but I put my DevTools on the right. I think Firebug trained a lot of people to put it on the horizontal, which is fine. If you want to do that, it's fine, no big deal. But the reason why I like it, I figure every screen that I've ever used in the last several years have been horizontally oriented. If you have a horizontal screen, then enjoy that and make it vertically this way. And then on the left of your DevTools, you have the ability to say, here's my working space, and you have fluidity. You can resize that. You can test your responsiveness and all that stuff much easier. So I just like it this way, and I love my coworkers by whenever they're over the shoulder pairing with them, I got to fix your thing. So I also pop open the console at the bottom. A number of my coworkers didn't know about this console, but This is accessible when you open DevTools for the first time, which is Option Shift I. I'm not sure. Option, I think it's Option Shift I. Command Option I, sorry. Then you'll pop up this panel, and then you can hit the escape key, and that will toggle the console panel, this little window at the bottom there. And you can hit escape to toggle it back down again. This console is exactly identical to the console tab at the top of the screen, but I like to have it here because you'll get your logging output there, especially if you're working in the source tab like I am here. It's really nice to be able to see it here. And a surprising number of people at the clients that I've been at, devs aren't aware that you can actually just like do a REPL in the bottom of this console. So like even if you're in the middle of debugging, like if you have a breakpoint, you can REPL in that context. So I'll show you some more of that as we're working, but very powerful feature. And then I also go into my Chrome flags and I turn on DevTools experiments. The reason why I enable that is because there are a couple of extensions that give you some side benefits if you enable DevTools experiments. I also will throw out that like Firefox Developer Edition is really cool. It used to be called Aurora. They renamed it Developer Edition because people only knew about Firebug and they wanted to say, hey, we've got DevTools and they're actually really robust. So if you're still using Firebug, you should not be doing that. You should probably just go to Dev Edition and just enjoy that. It's the same exact idea as Canary, it's just Firefox's nightlies. Their tools are really good. They've got a 3D like stacking context viewer, if you've ever played with that, where you can visualize how your CSS, Z-indexes are working. I'm not going to show you that, but I wanted to kind of mention that because some people aren't aware that Firebug is not the latest and greatest for Firefox. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the basics of what I consider debugging with DevTools. So I'm not going to assume anybody knows any of these. I'm just going to talk through them, and hopefully you understand by the end of it what we're referring to. So what I consider to be the debugging basics is working in your source code, making changes or additions to it so that you can debug runtime errors or any sort of defect or flaw that you're aware of. All of these really only affect you if you have DevTools open, by the way. So in case you weren't aware, there's a statement called debugger, for instance. What debugger is, if you go into your source code and you put in the word debugger, semicolon, or no semicolons if you're cool, I guess, then it will just say, hey, DevTools is open, I'm going to put a breakpoint right here. That happens anytime this thing debugger is interpreted by the engine. So that means that you can stick an if statement in front of it, and it will only break if that if statement is truthy. You can put it in a loop, and it will only break inside of that loop, for instance. Things like that. So it's a very straightforward thing. There's not much more to it than that. It's very powerful for doing it, but what are some disadvantages of debugger? Well, one is that you have to edit the source code, which maybe is fine if you're live coding your site and you have a local development thing. But if you have any sort of length of time between changing your code and viewing your code, like for instance, if you're debugging something that's on a staging server or on a production server, you can't do debugger. Most of the time you're going to be able to do debugger, but also think about this. If you forget debuggers, that causes problems down the road. If your linter isn't set up right or whatever, you can cause problems when you check those in accidentally. I know I've checked in debugger statements accidentally just because I'm a bad person. But every time that you change your source code, you want to generally avoid it, especially because it's a good starting point. But once you get like 8 debugger statements in, it takes longer and longer to cycle through your app. Like, okay, resume, or F8 if you have shortcuts. So the next one I want to talk about is setting a breakpoint. So setting a breakpoint is something that is maybe a little bit more, people should be aware of it. I'm going to switch over to my browser. Let me load up some of this. So when I'm talking about breakpoints, I'm talking about inside of your, so let me start. I'll start from blank screen, and then if you want to do the Command Option I, you open up your DevTools. You might notice that my breakpoints are already set. Chrome is really good about remembering your breakpoints, by the way. It's pretty awesome. Even if you like left the page for a month and you come back and you open DevTools and it's like, why do I have 25 breakpoints? So Chrome is really awesome about that, which is extremely helpful for people like me. And you can toggle them on and off. This is what the breakpoint looks like. So I've got right here a breakpoint for checking this if statement. Every time this if statement runs, it'll stop the program. And then there's another breakpoint right below it inside of that if statement. So if I need to reload this page real quick. If I focus, this is where this is set, is inside of the focus of that search box. So if I focus that breakpoint, it now is going to evaluate inside of this function, and it lets me see the state of the code of this place. So at this point, if I hover over the objects that are here, or what have you, the properties, I can see what they evaluate to. This is the kind of basic run-of-the-mill like debugging that you should be doing pretty comfortably. Like you set a breakpoint, you evaluate the state of your code. If you weren't aware, you have access to this object as it's set into this function. You have access to even the closure objects outside of this function. So you can evaluate why the X object is set to this thing, if that's helpful for you. We can see that I'm checking right now for the ready state to be equal to 4, and it is equal to 2, which means that it's not ready, if you speak XObj or XHR. So I'm going to hit F8, our function F8. It will go through the whole thing again, like this it happens in lightning speed, and it's set to ready state 3 right now. So it's still not 4, so it's never going to get inside of here. I'm going to resume again. Now the ready state is set to 4, meaning that it's got that function returned to itself. It's got the data ready. So because it's ready and this other statement is true, 200 is true, it's going to go into the callback, to the code below. So I'm going to resume the script execution. Now I'm inside that if block. Again, I can still see the whole stack, like everything that's happening. But when you're debugging applications that have XHR, the asynchronous nature of XHRs or HTTP requests, AJAX, whatever you want to call them, JavaScript has got a call stack, as you can see here on the left-hand side. That call stack, while it's very, very powerful, it sort of starts to break down once you get into asynchronous code. The reason is that since Chrome is a good engine, V8's a good engine, it wants to garbage collect as much as possible. So it's like, hey, since you deferred all these things to execute later, what I'm going to do is just kind of lose my reference to those things. I'm not going to remember all those functions off the call stack so that the GC, the garbage collector, can kind of work and do its thing. So when you're debugging, same thing, you don't have access to all that stuff. So you can see it says pause on a JavaScript breakpoint, and there's like no code outside of this, like no functions that have been called. So if I follow into the stack even more, you can see some of these like results that are happening. Right now my call stack is just one parse results call, and that'll be as deep as it goes for this. So yeah. Well, there is a thing that you can do, and I wanted to highlight this as well. There's an asynchronous checkbox that you can tick to solve that problem. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. That's the part about debugging that I wanted to mention really quickly with breakpoints. The next type of breakpoint I want to talk about setting is conditional breakpoints. Same exact concept. I'm not going to spend too much more time on it, just for the sake of time, but all conditional breakpoints are, it's kind of like that if this is truthy, then debugger thing that I was talking about. Instead of doing that, though, you do it right from Chrome DevTools. So you have a breakpoint, you can right-click it, you can go, I don't know, can you see that? You can go edit breakpoint right inside of your breakpoint that you already have set. When you edit the breakpoint, what happens is it gives you a little statement to put an evaluatable statement inside of. So I can do something along the lines of XObj if it's truthy, or I can do the same like ready state equal to 4. So like I can say, don't even show me this thing until I know that this thing is going to be the case. So like I want to wait till ready state is 4 before you even breakpoint for me. That's really, really powerful if you've ever had like a loop of 400 objects in an array, and you've like, okay, you got next, I skipped it, and then, yeah, you just want to commit suicide. So if you set the breakpoint, you notice it turns orange. It's not a faded orange. Like, faded orange looks like this. Can you see that? I know it's really faint, but the faded orange means it's a disabled breakpoint. So that's not going to execute until you check it, and then it goes to whatever. So if you look here, it's a bright orange. And then now, next time that I resume the script execution, I need to reload this page so that it fires out the request again. Get focus to the search box. Now it actually waits to stop that until I get to ready state 4. So think about that in terms of going through collections and arrays and things like that. That's the basics that I wanted to talk about for like just getting started. So now we're going to talk about how you use the console statement. I think everybody's got a thing of like console logging. You may have like your ideas wrapped around how console logs work. I wanted to talk about some little corner-y things that maybe you're not aware of with console, and then we'll move on from there. So for consoles, one thing I've come across a number of people that use concatenation, the plus operator. Try not to use the plus operator unless you've got a really good reason to do it. If you really need to string, like put something in a string, I would say maybe you didn't know that you can do string with %s and %d, like old style, like printf formatting. That works in console log. It doesn't work in like normal JavaScript, but like you can just put %s and it will stringify that for you right in line. So if you want to say like, you know, item x of y, you can do item %d of %d, comma, x, comma, y, and you get that item pretty printed for you. To show you what I mean by that, let me just bring this up real quick in the console. So if I want to do a console.log, this is what I'm talking about, like item x, not x, %d of %d, and then comma, and I'll just type in the number 3, comma 4. I'm just doing literals to make it simple. And then it logs item 3 or 4. And imagine like going through a loop of a bunch of items where maybe you want to conditionally log things, or you want to capture certain scenarios. Maybe this results in a nicer, pretty print output for you, for your use case, especially if you're trying to capture that one value and not the whole thing. So it allows you to be a little bit more curative with your items. The reason why I don't like using the concatenator operator, the plus operator, is because it results in a lot of oddities, like we've seen when the nature of objects change. We're working with a dynamically typed language, right? We don't know what is always behind the curtain of that object that we're logging. And so the nice thing about Chrome with the comma operator is it will, if you log an object in here with commas, it won't attempt to stringify that. It will do the tree explosion, like the pretty print with like collapsible navigation and everything. Very, very powerful if you're trying to debug lots of complex objects. And so it's better than stringifying that object unless you know you want a specific property of the object to stringify. So I would say like try to default to using commas instead of plus signs for console log. A little bit more advanced, Chrome specifically has got this group functionality. Has anybody heard of console.group before? Raise hands. Couple. All console.group does is, I'll show you, it just takes the console logs that you're providing in and it groups them into nice collapsible sections. So if you've ever had like somebody writing a bunch of code with you and they put in like 1,400 console logs to debug a section of the app and you're like, I'm not working on that feature, but I'm not going to go, I don't have time to go through and chase their code down and remove all their console logs. You can do console group and give it a name, like some kind of ID, so whatever feature. And then when you call console.group, everything that gets logged after that gets grouped into that. This will fall under the feature. And you can see how there's like a collapsible thing that it catches in. So if I do that item 1, that goes into the feature thing. It looks more exploded out because I'm actually doing it in the REPL here. But once you want to kill that, you just do group end, and then you give it the same ID. So in this case, feature, and that ends that group. So now that group will forever be that size. So you can imagine like prefixing a block of code with group and then suffixing it with group end. You can even do it where there's a collapsed version of that, where you do console.group collapsed, and then you just do the same deal. Like every time you do a log, it goes into this collapsed thing, and you never see it, no matter how much you log to it. So that's pretty cool, I think. So for writing in your code, that's really a neat way to be able to control that. I tend to not like to see a bunch of like console log output, but sometimes you're working on a team of like 40 people and you can't really help it. There's a thing called assert. If you're writing unit tests, you might be familiar with the term assert. Assert is just something that you say, I'm asserting this to be true, and when it fails, it's going to print whatever string or object that you pass it. So this takes two arguments. It takes the expression, which is any expression in the context of that application. It's just like an if test. So it might be similar to saying like, if truthy, then console log. But instead of doing that, you say console.assert, truthy statement, and then the thing you want to log. I think I misspoke, but I should have said if not truthy before. So it's again, when that assertion fails, then it's going to log for you. That's it. So it might be especially helpful when you're going through a series of tests that you're trying to write, and you want to verify that your assertions are working in the real runtime. This might be a good way to debug your assertion tests as well. Console.table, this one I think got a little more popular a few years ago. Who's heard of console table? Okay, oh, awesome. Console.table is this really, really cool thing where if you've got a collection, an array of objects, you can print it out to the console. And it's pretty print, HTML table. It's amazing. It's just perfect. So if you've ever had to go through and be like, all right, I'm looking for objects, like index, whatever, and this kind of alleviates all that. Everything is it takes the similar named properties and just throws them into a column, and you get this really amazing output from it. So I like it a lot. Let me see if I can show you console table. So I'm going to go to a spot on the app where I've already loaded up the index. And then resolve gets called. I'm used to working this zoomed in. So if I got search results, so let me see if I can go to that spot. All right, so now I've got my search results. Oh, it's the object, sorry. It's not the index that I want. So yeah, here's an array that I can pick off. So if I do console.table, search index dot fields, this is the list of fields that I'm searching on. Oops. Maybe I spelled something wrong.
Is it this search index?
Is it under this?
It's not a closure.
It's in a closure, so it should work. Like it thinks it knows it. This is not fine. Oh, maybe I haven't actually returned anything yet. Then that might be why. So let me just make up a dumb example so that we can move on with that. So if I do name Wayne and then ID 5, and then name George, and then his ID is 2. You get this. That's all I wanted to show. It's just, if you can imagine this in the case of getting 20 results back, it gives you a nice way to kind of visualize where any off-pattern things might be. So just another tool to have in your tool belt. That's all I really wanted to show. One more note about console that I didn't know until I was preparing this talk like 2 months ago, 3 months ago. There is a save as for the console, which was like, wow, that's awesome. So if you have like been debugging for a while and you notice some erratic output, you can just right-click anywhere on the console. You see what I did down here? Just like right-click and there's a save as. You click that save as, and it just lets you save that file, and you get like a text dump of all that stuff. The tables don't look that pretty, honestly, but everything else looks great. So I wanted to give you that, again, as another way. If you need to send that to your QA or like the people who look at your requirements, that might be a good spot for you. And then I link to the console API reference down below here. All right, so debugging async. This was the thing I mentioned I was going to get back to. When you're working with JavaScript, oftentimes, especially like if you write a lot of Node or a lot of Ajax type things, eventually asynchronous code comes into the picture. And asynchronous code can be kind of finicky for you because, like I said, it doesn't, if you're trying to follow the stack trace backwards, that stack trace kind of disappears eventually. So here's a couple of things that you can do to enhance the way that you do your asynchronous code debugging. So one thing that I'll talk about is the async checkbox. I happen to run async tick almost all the time. It only impacts performance. It does negatively impact performance, but only when DevTools is open. So like I said, Chrome wants to be performant for you. It doesn't want to penalize you, so it defaults async to off. But if you look, and what I'm talking about is in the sources tab of your browser, you can see this async checkbox here. It defaults to off. If you tick it, then immediately after your next reload, everything comes back to everything returns in the form of like long form stack traces. So it even jumps outside of set timeouts or any like XML HTTP requests, which is really powerful if you're trying to get a sense of like where a closure value came from or why this statement is not evaluated the way you expect it to. So let's walk through a more practical example of that. So if I'm going to keep using the same style guide app here because there is some XML stuff that you can evaluate here. So in the case of the flow that we have here, when we go through and we get this object that we're returning, we load this, we call getURL with this URL, and then we pass it a callback. This is a fairly common pattern of like, you call something, give it a callback, and it runs after that. That's how you do async in most cases. Even promises work this way, just they kind of tidy it up for you. So once we're done with that, then we handle whatever that index came back with. So the callback that we pass, if you look, we're calling load index here inside of this getIndex function, and then we pass it the function that the callback that it's going to use. So by the time we're done, this resolve function gets called with that search index. And then resolve is defined. I can't find it now. Oh, resolve is passed into from the promise thing. Gotcha. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll put a breakpoint on this resolve, and then we'll see what happens when we reload the page. Hopefully this works. All right, so I'm going to navigate through this. All right, good. So now we're at the point where we've resolved. We're a couple functions deep now in the callbacks, but the call stack is looking pretty short. So the call stack is only 2 lines deep. It's got this anonymous function, and it's got this object on ready state change, which we had defined up here. So that's all the call stack is. The reason why it's short is because, again, Chrome wants to throw away that stuff as references. So we can only navigate back in time 2 different places. So if I tick this asynchronous box and I reload, then I need to go up, focus the search box. I'm going to continue through. And so now, if you look, it looks different, right? The call stack shows the same 2 functions, but instead of it saying, like, this is as far back as you can see, I don't know what you're talking about, it's got the XML HTTP request.send there, and then below it, it's got all the functions that led up to it. Some of these are functions that you may be familiar with if you're using a framework. Oftentimes, these functions look like jQuery fetches or things like that that maybe you didn't write. But it's nice to be able to see them because you can actually follow the flow of your program. And eventually, you get to the point where you're like, oh yeah, I recognize this function because I wrote that. So this is how you can kind of shortcut that inability to look into your code. So if you've ever spent time debugging Ajax, but you're like, yeah, I know this thing executed, but I don't know where it came from originally, here's how you can trace it back. Even to the point of like going through your vendor libraries and like debugging their stuff if you want to. So it's very, very powerful, that async checkbox, and like I run with it checked all the time. But if you notice that you're getting a lot of lag, disable it, like just uncheck it for the time being, but you just should know that it's there for sure. Whoops, zoom on. So that's the async checkbox. I was going to talk about the promises panel. This is still in the Chrome DevTools experiments. So what I'm talking about when I say experiments is if you go to Chrome and then you go to flags, so actually I got it marked there. Inside this tiny zoomed in screen, you can see this DevTools experiments thing. This is where you would enable that. And again, like treat your browser like you're serious about it. Like this is your development environment, because it is. This is just like any IDE you have. Like you want to be opting into the features. Like you are the crowd that this is made for. So like when Chrome is pushing updated DevTools stuff, you get them first, right here, and you can like play with them. Sometimes you'll have your heart broken, and they'll take it away from you, and that sucks. But like this is the good news of like working with Chrome, is you get to like be in the middle of this messiness. So. So anyway, I enable this. You have to relaunch your Canary if you're doing this following along with me at home. So yeah, once that's enabled, now your DevTools have got a couple of unique things you can do. There's, I'm sorry, I went really fast. Inside the top DevTools kebab menu, not the hamburger menu, like below it, this 3 dots vertically menu. Click on that, and then you go to the preferences pane there. That opens up, the normal Chrome DevTools preferences that you may have been familiar with, which, by the way, they added a dark theme. I don't know if anybody saw that or not, but like, that's awesome. I like dark themes, so. Anyway, if you go to experiments, this is a new tab that you get. And so in the experiments, these are all things that Chrome is warning you will potentially break things. So you want to be cognizant of that. But you get like an accessibility inspector. Like most of these things are disabled by default. And then I go through and tick things as I want things. But you can actually get like custom UI themes in your DevTools, which think about this as an IDE again, right? Like if you like things in a certain way, you can tick this and you can download really great themes. And I've actually linked to some of my slides. So if you want to have things with Monakai and whatever, Solarized Dark or what have you, you can do that, custom fonts and all that. So the thing that I was going to mention is that there's a promise inspector here. I don't want to go into promises because that's a whole different thing. But if you have worked with promises or have to contend with like either Angular or Q or whatever, this promises inspector is kind of like another view into that async thing. It just kind of breaks it out into a table at the bottom. I'm not going to go into that because we're kind of short on time, but it's very nice that you can do that. So anyway, there's also, I just don't have time for everything, but there's a new thing in just plain JavaScript. This is not Chrome at all. This is kind of a free JavaScript thing, but because you're writing JavaScript in your REPL, in that console, you can do things like construct your own fetches. So like instead of having to do that convoluted XObject, XHR nonsense where I'm checking ready states, there's an experimental technology that you can look up on MDN called fetch. It's accessible as a global function, so you can just write fetch. And you can pass it a request object, which is also like, just the example in there just tells you everything you need to know, with a URL. And then you call .then, which is the promise signature for like whenever that's done. And then you get the response object. It's very easy to do. So fetch. So look at that if you have time later It's because it makes, honestly, like sometimes you're trying to get like JSON responses and it's like, I just want it right here. Like I want to try it again a different way. Instead of having to go back to your source code and recompile, you can do it in the context of your debugger. Side note about that, if you do any asynchronous stuff inside of the console while you're breakpointed, it won't run until the UI thread clears out, including your breakpoint. So you can't run something that's like a fetch while you're breakpoint and expect to get it back until the breakpoint clears out. That's just the way that single-threaded JavaScript works, which all JavaScript is single-threaded. The next thing I want to talk about is just JavaScript performance audits. This is something that if you've ever gone around poking through the timeline of Chrome DevTools, you might have seen some of this stuff. I want to kind of mention a little bit of how you might approach that when you're developing an app. So what I'm talking about is inside of here, there's this timeline thing, and every time you reload, you get the chance to capture all the events that are happening. So I have it ticked here where you can check the screenshots box, and that screenshots box will come along and say, okay, I'm going to see what the page looks like at every point of loading. This only penalizes you when you have the timeline tab open. They've been improving this timeline tab quite a bit in the last couple releases, and so they now focus you on the most interesting area of the timeline by default, which is really nice because you start looking when you zoom in. But this kind of works like some graphs on Google do, where you can stretch and expand this. Let me zoom in a little bit. And so there's even like this, you see the overview that's happening. You can even see like what the screen looks like. There's not much going on. This is a static site, so like it doesn't, like most single page apps, take a while to kind of like get going, and you start seeing like things popping in and then people cursing at you. But like with this, you have basically everything loads up pretty quickly, within a few hundred milliseconds. So, but you can see at every stage, and Paul Irish demos this in some of his videos. You can see at every stage how your page is rendering as you go through your timeline. And then you can also see like what's causing your problem. So like if there's any lag, you have the same access to, parsing HTML takes this long. You can swipe through here, expand and zoom in and zoom out, and you can see like which scripts are taking the longest time. And it even lets you like look at specifically where in the scripts like things are getting called from. So you can go through these subtabs in the panels below, and you can see which activities are taking the longest time. For single page apps that have like big long hangs, this will stick out like sore thumbs. Like you go to your timeline and you just see this massive like solid stretch, and you're like, bingo, you need to look at this. So then you start examining your code. That's when you can start doing dynamic breakpoints and things like that. So very powerful tool, timeline. I hope that you look at it. I'm trying to give you like the whirlwind overview of DevTools, give you some inspiration of where you can look at. This guy is great. If you guys don't know AeroTwist, his name's Paul something, I can't remember. He's really good. He works for Google as a developer advocate, and he takes people's requests, if you haven't seen it, for like auditing his site performance, and he will go through and like analyze their site step by step and say, here's what you can do differently to make little things perform better, like scrolling for like parallax pages and things like that. He's a really good resource. He does a bunch of YouTube videos, and he's pretty active on Twitter as well. So check out AeroTwist for more of the, especially the timeline stuff. Like he'll give you a great example of like lots of things you can do with your timeline. So before we end, I want to talk about debugging CSS. So there's just a couple of things that you should know about CSS debugging in DevTools, and it's way better than it used to be. Like DevTools for CSS was already good, and it's just getting better and better. I think that especially for people that work in an engineering context, there's a real temptation to kind of just ignore the CSS stuff. But if you ever end up having to work in that role, knowing this tool, like the CSS panel, is really, really powerful. It took me way too long, embarrassingly too long, to realize there was a color picker and an eyedropper for playing with colors in the CSS panel. Did you guys know that? Who knew it? All right, I'm an idiot, I'm sorry. So like, for people who didn't know it, so like your elements panel and all that, you guys are familiar with this. When you're looking at, like, let's just pick something with a more interesting color. So you go here, so there's a background color, and then you can see like the little tooltip that pops up when you hover over it. Like maybe I knew it and I just wasn't just totally spaced on it, but I'm not gonna say I never knew it. So you click on it and you get this like amazing color picker, like it's really good. And so by default, when you click on it, it lets you don't even have to like click the icon, it just gives you a color picker. So you can like swap that color out just by clicking anywhere. And then you can toggle that by clicking on it. You can change it to HSL if you like playing with that. I prefer HSL it's more human to me. Change alpha values for it. You can see the tertiary thing like changing over there. Just play with some default values and things like that. Very, very cool, especially if you're trying to get like a very nuanced like take on a color. Being able to like cycle through and say, you know, does it look right? But I'm gonna play with it. Once you get it, copy and paste that thing right to your source code, you're good. Or bonus points, look up how to save it from DevTools, which you can totally do. So next thing I want to talk about is there's a Bezier curve editor. Who knew about the Bezier curve editor? Less people, fewer people. I feel better about that. I didn't know about that for so long. But if anybody knows Leah Veru, her awesome work in the CSS dev community, I don't know that she actually contributed this, but the Bezier curve picker is like so similar to her work. So I'll show you what it looks like. Let me look. This has got some animations with some like curves that we can evaluate. This is I made a slot machine simulator I play video games too much. So I made a thing based on the Borderlands slot machines that you can play. So one of the things that you can get is whenever there's an animation, you can look at the curve. So like every animation, whether you specify it or not, it's got some kind of curve. I think it defaults to linear, but maybe it's ease in and ease out. A lot of people use ease in and ease out, right? So like if you click, there's this little icon, you know, just like the color picker icon, same size and everything, and then you click it, and then you get this sweet Bezier curve editor. Looks just like Leah Veru's, right? Like if anybody's played with that one online. So not only can you like specify your own like curves for this and like change the spline, it gives you a bunch of defaults as well. So ease out, ease in, and that's live changing. Whoops, I just like totally went back a page. Idiot. Let me go back down. So yeah, I was going to say, once you specify one, you get to like toggle through all the different equations that calculate the curve. So like sometimes like, you can look at that left wheel as being really erratic, you know, when I change some of these. It's like out and back does this cool like bounce effect over there. Sometimes you see the names of functions and you're like, I don't know what kind of animation that's going to give me. But like, what if you could preview it in the browser while you're developing it? Wouldn't that be cool? And you totally can. So there's that. There's the animations panel too, which is kind of a new thing. So this is the great thing about having that console panel open in the bottom corner of your DevTools is that you get this panel that nobody else gets. So let me show you what that looks like. If you hit escape on anything, literally anything, you will get this panel. And so again, there's another kebab menu because Chrome DevTools has got the best UX in the world. And so if you click on it, I love it, I'm just kidding. There's this thing, sometimes these don't appear, is why I'm telling you this. So like as you're going through your app, you're like, oh, I don't have that panel. It's because you can toggle these. So by default, I think it's just console only, correct me if I'm wrong, but, and so you need to click kebab menu and then you can pull up these different things. Like notice too, there's some like really awesome things in here. Like that promises panel I told you about. There's the network conditions panel where you can like simulate throttling, which I'm not even talking about tonight, but it's totally there. There is a new sensors tab, which is all about like emulating different device conditions. But what I want to talk about right now is the animations tab. So animations tab is just going to help you, it listens for animations that are happening on the page, and it helps you debug them. So like in a page like this where there's a bunch of weird animation happening, it catches this animation, and then it splits out all the elements. What? That's crazy. So you can actually see the timeline, and you can, if you ever use a thing like Premiere, Adobe Premiere, After Effects, you might be familiar with like scrubbing the timeline back and forth. You can do that here as well. You can just take this thing, like rock your animations back, and you can play and pause it. So like if you want to like see how a certain animation falls, you can do that. You can play it and then you can slow it down. You can slow it way down. You can speed it back up. And then you can see like where you want things lined up. So if you want to like drag animations back and forth, what you're seeing with these dots is keyframes and calculated keyframes. And you'll notice that like just because this app is kind of like a random variation, like this all of them have different speeds, all the wheels do. That's why this thing seems to like extend out into infinity, because it does. Like these wheels won't always like cycle. Like eventually they might, I don't know, but like it just keeps going, because when you compare like all the 3 different speeds, all these elements will not have the same animations happening at the same time forever. So that's why it's doing that. And it's like the faded out one is saying like, well, here's where it's going to be later, here's where it's going to be later. If you have a tight animation loop, you won't have that extended out to infinity. It'll just be like, boom, it's going to loop like this, and that's it, because it doesn't like intersect with the other animations. So that's all that means. I think animations panel, if you ever have to work with CSS transitions, like for playing with buttons and responsiveness of a site, great panel to be able to reference. So I wanted to throw that out there for the CSS people in here. There's also a keyframes editor that they just added fairly recently too, like a month ago. And the keyframes editor is just as cool as the animations panel. Up until now, people who write keyframes, they were a sad group, and they did not have a lot of benefits for themselves. Like it was really painful to do. But now, the people that write keyframes have a little box that explodes it all out. This is what the keyframe editor looks like. I'm going to just drag this panel down. There we go. So you can kind of see it a little bit better. It looks like this. The reason why this is great is because otherwise you had, before the keyframes panel, if you wanted to change the keyframes of your animation, you had no way to do it easily in live coding. So like now you can actually see the 0%, the 50%, 100%, like these are all things that I set in my animation to make it rotate. So if you need to, you can play with that, and you can do like shift up and down on numbers, right, for CSS. So you can like change your keyframes and see how that changes your animation as well. So check out the keyframe editor to make it a little bit easier to debug your keyframes. Just like the Bezier curves, sometimes those keyframes can be really high level and hard to visualize until you're in the editor. And then render timelines is just one more way that you can see the page loading. This happens, render timelines happen in the network tab, which is really confusing to me, but it kind of makes sense if, I don't know, whatever. So if you reload the page, well, first of all, you want to have capture screenshots ticked. So that tick means it's blue. UX is amazing. So when it's blue, it's recording. And you can see because it gives you like this expando box there. So it says hit R to reload, Command R to reload. So once you do that, as the page loads, it gives you that same sort of screenshot, and you can like right arrow through everything. Now this is, you notice that it's on the network panel, and so it's trying to give you another lens. Instead of it being like, here's how the JavaScript loaded up in the timeline tab, here's how the network assets loaded, and how that affected how this thing looks. So it's a totally different lens. Even though it seems like a good purpose, the reason why you want to use this is you're like, well, I've got these assets that are loading up and they're slowing my app down. I want to see what the page looks like at every step of that. So that's what you would use the render timeline for. And you should be able to use both the render timeline and the screenshot timeline from the timeline tab as appropriately, so that you can kind of wield them, dual wield them, if you will. So bonus points real quick. If you have the time to do it, again, treat your canary, your Chrome canary, like it's your IDE, like it's your editor. Look into how you do source mapping. This source mapping is a concept where when you're concatenating lots of JavaScript modules together, and when you are uglifying things, your build tool knows where that maps back to in the source. That's what source map means, all it means. And so it generates the logic for your whatever browser, Chrome, Firefox, like many of the browsers are compatible with source maps now. So when you're stepping through your code in the sources panel, it doesn't show you the minified code like A and B and C for the arguments. It shows you the real code because it knows exactly where that character lines up to the original source code lines. Very powerful thing. And even when you're debugging it, it shows you the real names of those things. It shows you how to, you can step through your code. You can modify your code. You can even save your code, like I alluded to a little bit before. So you can do almost anything once you have source mapping enabled. Without source mapping enabled, it's a real pain to debug uglified code that has been kind of distorted and mutated. I mentioned earlier Node Inspector. Out of all those tools that I had on that intro slide, Node Inspector is probably the most useful for me because I use Node to do my build stuff. So whenever I'm making like gulp things or whatever, grunt things or webpack things, Node is the thing that's executing that for me. Or if you're serving up a server, when you're trying to debug those tasks, like often I was thinking like, man, it'd be really nice if I had that debugger here. What do? It's Node Inspector, and it looks just like Chrome DevTools because it was based on Chrome DevTools. Like it's just a fork of it. And so they just basically do all the work for you. I'll show you kind of what that looks like to do if it cooperates with me. So, like if I'm in here, I'm going to kill this, and I'm going to do like node debug. And I bet it's not going to work if I do gulp, is it? I don't think it's going to work, no. So like node debug, I'll show you what it looks like anyway. Here's what it looks like. Are you familiar? It's DevTools. So this is just a REPL, because I didn't execute any script, stupid me. But if I hit, you immediately are started on a breakpoint of the first line of the script so that you can catch up with things. So you don't have to set the breakpoint, it just stops you there. And then it gives you this access to this REPL. So if you want, you can do like bar test gets thing, and then you can hit enter, and now you have the test that, whatever, this is just a node REPL in the console. But what you can do is you can do breakpoints, like if test is triple equal to thing, then debugger. Why can't I see this thing? All right, the debugger. So it gives me a breakpoint, just like you can do in Chrome DevTools. It's the same thing. So you can actually see it splits out a new tab because it says VM and it makes up a VM instance for you. Like it's got some random number that's going to appear afterwards. But it's the real tab. You can even like do your inspect, see how I like hovered over test and it popped up thing for the text. It's just like Chrome DevTools. It's just running with the node system in the background. The way it does it is it opens up kind of a port for you to do it. And sometimes that port breaks and kind of falls apart. So you might need to be a little bit more prepared to go out into the wild and use searches and Stack Overflows to figure out like why your particular configuration isn't working. The way it works best is like normal node scripts that you can fire off from the command line. So if you could do like, node whatever, node debug will just play with that really easily. Even if that node script fires off a gulp script or a webpack thing or whatever. That's what I want to talk about with Node Inspector. And what else do we want to say? There's this thing called Remote Debug Gateway that you should look at. And again, I'm going to link to this thing in the meetup if you guys look at the meetup after this. So you can kind of play around with the links on here. But there's a guy, Kenneth Aukenberg, I think, who is, I think he works with Microsoft now actually. But he's a big developer tool community guy. And he's worked on a couple of different things related to debugging remotely. Including like doing things like reaching out through the screen and like debugging somebody's app live while they're working on it. There's a couple of tools that do that too, where you can use your DevTools to see someone else's like screen over the wire. But Remote Debug Gateway, he's got this initiative in mind where he'd like to use Chrome DevTools or any DevTools to talk to any browser. So like once you get really proficient with one DevTool kit, you could theoretically plug into other browsers too. This is not something that is like ready to do, but if you're interested in DevTools at all, I recommend that. DevTools Author is the other thing that I mentioned that, just for bonus points, if you really are in love with the idea of like your browser as an editing environment, you see there's Chrome Author, DevTools Author gives you this Author Settings tab, and that allows you to change your theme. So like you could, pick, like I said, you can pick Monokai if you'd like that, and pick a different font, change the font size, and then you just close and reopen DevTools, and then it applies that font to you. And you get everything that maybe you're familiar with, that makes you feel comfortable or happy with in your normal dev environment, and you get it in your Chrome DevTools. And again, this was kind of like before DevTools had their dark theme. If the dark theme is all you need, it's stock with Chrome Canary. You can use it right now. But if you enable the UI, you have to enable the UI experiments for DevTools in that experiments tab in order to use Chrome DevTools Author. But that gives you this kind of like cool power over how things look and feel. And the more comfortable you are in DevTools, the happier you're going to be. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Any questions? I wanted to open up for any questions. Anyone has it? Yep.
On that, the animation, the console tab, the animation, does that only work on CSS animation? Or would you use like request animation frames in JavaScript to actually?
Yeah, that animations panel, as far as I know, it's only working with CSS animations right now. But it's a good thought. I don't know if request animation frame is going to be brought in under that panel or not. It's generic enough that it could accommodate it theoretically. I think the hard thing would be like, how do you catch on that? Because like that can be fired by a code loop, So yeah, good thought. I don't think it does though. Any other questions about DevTools? Yes, sir?
Do you use any of the like step over or step into stuff that is small?
Yeah, step over. So he asked if you if I use any step over or step into things. It is useful. Let me switch back over to this toolkit thing. When you're in the sources panel, these are the buttons he's referring to. Right next to pause and resume is step over the next function call, step into the next function call. This is pretty common with every debugger and breakpoint system that I've ever worked with. But all that it does is whenever you're looking, because like your debugger stops on the line before the function gets invoked. So all this does is says, hey, don't, like, just go to the next one. Like, don't even like breakpoint with that next one. So it's a nice way to like, if you are debugging a lot of debugger statements, you can kind of like just immediately say next one, because you don't want to have to set breakpoints for everything. This allows you to skip the breakpoint setting and just go one by one, next function call. Step into means, hey, this function is about to execute. I want you to go one layer deeper into that function scope and start me on that first line, and then you can start going step over, step over, step over. If you want to take the red pill, I think, is that the right pill? I don't know what the pills mean. You can step out of the current function and it takes you up a level. So that's how that works. It's kind of the reverse of that. So yeah, I do use them. The one I use way more is when you've got a, let me reload this page. Oh, I killed the server. Tell me again. The one I use way more is this thing that I can't even demo because of itinerary locked up. Oh, I have Node Inspector still open. Come back to me. Let me see if I can do it from this one. Please be patient for my gulp script. So you guys know about the resume button? The one I use more than resume, I was going to say, is long press on resume. Because if you know about long press on resume, it does this really cool thing where give it this, give it that. So you see how it's got this little caret down there, little arrow? If you long press on resume, it expands the drop down And this play button means that it will fast forward past all your breakpoints for 500 milliseconds, which, like, you know how fast like JavaScript executes if you don't have breakpoints. So like that's pretty much all your breakpoints for most cases. Unless you're waiting on like a network request to happen, it's going to just fast forward you to the next breakpoint after any network request happen. So you press that, all my breakpoints get skipped, and UI thread's done. So I use that way more, and I think that's a cool trick. And I didn't learn it for like a year and a half of like regularly working in Chrome, that it was even there. Is there any more questions about DevTools that I can answer? Or any comments or thoughts or things that people want to add? I don't know how many seconds of awkwardness is allowed. Okay.
Everybody, give it up for Wayne one more time. That was awesome. I forgot to mention the Ember.js meetup. That's you want to go?
Sure. So Wednesday, March 23rd, which is in 2 weeks from now, I think. Having the first inaugural Ember.js meetup over at the Iron Yard, which is sort of around here by Hot Lady Dog, about 3 or 4 blocks near the convention center. We're going to be talking about Ember CLI, and we're going to be trying to recreate the famous DHH like blog in 15 minutes. And we might even do a test driven. So come out, see some surprises, ask some questions, get to know something new, and probably pizza.
Awesome. Yeah, and one more shout out to Emma for hosting us and to Strongman for the food. And I want to say a big hi to folks from Nearform. Wyatt coming in from Kansas City. So everybody give him a big Nashville welcome. And everybody please leave so I can go home and play the division. Thank you.